Hi guys, today we have with us Dave Trotter, who is an English teacher, and I also heard that you, Dave, have a major in history. Is that right?
Actually, it's in political science. I have a minor in
Oh,
history, but I do history. So it's like I worked in politics for many years, but I like history. I don't like politics, but I like political history. So yeah.
okay, I get it. And English teaching.
Mhm.
And I have prepared a list of questions for you, but the main question is for Russians, a native speaker is like a god. And
Mhm.
this God who has the knowledge, who
Mhm.
doesn't need to check every time the meaning and anything. So, is a native speaker the best teacher?
It's interesting because if somebody is an A1 or an A2 level, I usually tell them to speak to somebody who knows their language first, whether it be a non-native, like a Russian teacher who knows English, or an American or British or whatever person who knows Russian, because they can kind of provide that connection. So
Hmm.
I think in the early stages there are some things in which you need to understand things, maybe, and it all depends on who the person is. It depends on how analytical they are. So if they are a person who looks at things and then tries to figure out and solve problems with the things, then trying to get some sort of answers as to why you do something is different than, let's say, the approach that we see other people do, like Stephen Krashen and others that say, "Oh, just read something," or Steve Kaufman, "Just read
Hmm.
something, you'll eventually get it." I think the learning approaches are totally different. I'd say the Krashen and the Kaufman approach is more artistic, whereas other people like myself like to look at the technical part of it.
Yeah, right. So there is some logic in English, not some. There is a huge
Mhm.
part of logic in English. I would say even English could be a synonym for logic sometimes, because
Right.
your language is super analytical. And when I try to explain students things, I try to compare it with Russian phrases and search some Russian words to explain things, and people are okay, I get it. And
Mhm.
then sometimes after 30 or 40 lessons or a year or two, I say you can continue learning with a native speaker. You have to,
Right.
because of course I can communicate and etc. I do have a Russian accent. I
Mhm.
know it, but yeah, sometimes people stay with me as friends and we continue communicating. And sometimes they search for a native speaker. And sometimes, we have this thing. They have lessons with me and with a native speaker,
Mhm.
so just an additional thing. But yeah. So usually when students come to you, what level are they?
I would say that the lowest, I mean, I've had a few A2 students,
Mhm.
but they're usually about minimum a few B1s, usually most are B2, but then you can get into the advanced levels as well. So yeah, it really differs, but I would say the lowest would be lower intermediate.
Hmm.
Yeah.
So, how is it like teaching a student who has such a low level? Uh, what do you do during the lesson to explain things to him?
Well, actually, it's kind of the nice thing about, let's say, somebody who's B2 is that they already have an understanding of English that we can go ahead with the lesson in English. That's where A1 and A2 is a little bit hard, that you'd have to switch from one language to the other. And I remember when I was learning French, I had that point. There were times where I would speak in French, and all of a sudden I needed to switch to English. Whereas now I can just do the whole entire thing in French and not even have to go to English at all. And it's that moment where you realize, okay, well, you can do that. And from that point, it's a matter of, well, I mean, it depends on each individual student's needs. And that's one of the problems, I think, with a lot of videos even out there that I might
Hmm.
do or others, is you're asking a student to self evaluate their own English level instead of somebody else evaluating their English level and noticing their mistakes. So a student a lot of times thinks that they think that they're doing something correct and accurate. And then
Mm.
all of a sudden, like you hear and you're like, oh no. And what I usually say to my students in my first lesson that I always have with them, I always ask them what they think their weaknesses are and what their strengths are. And I always tell them that chances are what you think is a problem is probably not a problem. And what you're not even thinking of is the real problem. So I
Mhm.
think in that situation, it's interesting. But with lower intermediate students, they have enough English. And it's nice because you can kind of form the English from that point, because some students can get so far down to level they have good vocabulary, they can think about English quickly, they can speak quickly, but they still use the wrong things. And then they just continue this endless loop of making the same mistake all the time. And I think the more mature you get in a language, the
Mhm.
more likely a mistake will just stay.
Yeah, you're right. Did you have a situation in the lesson when a student makes mistakes constantly, but they don't want to change it? They just want to talk and continuously, and they ask you, "Oh, please don't correct me. I want to speak like that." So, have you had that?
Right. Well, they don't say don't correct me, but they do
Hmm.
want to talk.
Hmm.
And, there are some that, and you know it, and there are some admittedly that will, I would say they would just talk and talk and talk, and they just see that as the practice. And, I think we're going to probably touch on this between,
Hmm.
let's say, maybe Russian speakers versus other European speakers, because there is a huge difference.
Hmm.
When I work with Russian speakers, it's very much the opposite. So there are students who want to talk, and if that's the practice that they want, then that works. And it depends, because each student has their own individual need. I have a
Hmm.
student right now who wants to really focus on grammar, so we do that. I have
Hmm.
other students that it's just like, hey, we're on. We have 1 hour. Let's talk. So it really, when you've done over 10,000 hours of individual teaching, you get everything.
Yeah, you're right. In
Mhm.
my case, it's just they start speaking Russian, and I just please switch to English.
Mhm.
Okay, so do you have a favorite case of teaching a Russian student?
I don't know if I necessarily have a favorite case, because an overwhelming majority of my students are Russian speaking. And I'd say about 75 to 85% are.
Mhm.
And that, I think that's by design, because I taught in Murmansk. So I actually did like the teaching environment, even though they were with younger learners in Murmansk. So I would have to say that was an interesting experience. The only time that I've ever taught in a classroom for a prolonged period of time. But I would say that, yeah, it's. I think it goes a student by student basis. I don't know if there's necessarily anything unique, but there are situations where you build maybe a personal relationship more with one student compared to another student, and I think that determines what
Mhm.
happens. So yeah, I think you have to have the connection, and if you can make that connection, then that student in and of themselves will be more more interest. Oh, I don't even want to say interesting, because it would admit that the others are boring, which is not the case. It makes it more, the flow of the conversation goes better if you are already at the same level, you can speak about something, then
Mhm.
it makes whatever you're doing go by quicker, and I guess less painful.
So, what is the longest period of time you have had a student for?
I have one, so I have two, and I don't know which one is first. But on my current students,
Mhm.
2019.
All
Yeah, so I,
right.
t- I I taught in Murmansk in 2019, and when I left Murmansk, I picked up more online students. And yeah, since summer of 2019 would
Mhm.
be what it would be. So yeah, almost 5 years now.
Yeah, I guess I have the same two students like that. And once so a man came to me. He was in LA. His wife was pregnant, and now his son is 4.
Mm.
So it's just like I'm waiting for 3 more years to pick him up. Just like
Right. Well, and that's the thing with my students. So I think that the student I've had the longest is from Mexico. And
Mhm.
so his daughter is now 16. So I remember when she was a lot younger. So now he's talking about getting her a car and doing all these other things. And yeah, because you remember when she was like significantly younger. And it's, you think, even though he hasn't changed and I haven't changed, our looks basically and our topics basically say the same.
Mhm.
Seeing the life that's gone around him. Now, and that is one difference with me too, that a lot of students that I even still have, those are the longest students I have. But the student from Mexico, I think, is the longest. But I had a lot of my students before COVID hit, and a lot of
Mhm.
them still learn today with me. And there's a difference because I think a lot of people got students when COVID hit. It really blew up everything. But for me, I got a lot of them beforehand. So I was able to know them before kind of the whole entire world went to hell.
Yeah, well, right.
Yeah.
I see. So, well, uh, so during the lessons, we usually correct mistakes.
Mhm.
How do you treat mistakes in real life?
Well, I mean, well, first of all, with my lessons, I correct mistakes, but I don't necessarily do it verbally. I have a sheet and a document that as
Mhm.
they're speaking, I put stuff in it and I tell them we're going to go ahead and come back to this and
Mhm.
discuss everything, unless it's something repetitive, like, for example, forgetting articles. And it's
Mhm.
like there's a point where I want to make it repetitive to tell people to kind of form a habit of doing it. I'll say, hey, you'll have me stop saying stop as soon as you start saying the articles kind of thing.
Mhm.
And in everyday situations, no one ever corrects anyone. And then again, I think this kind of comes to, I would say, the Russian approach to things compared to the American approach to things. I mean, we're an immigrant society that have a lot of people from a lot of countries. And for the most part, most English majority speaking countries are going to be that way. Britain's that way, Australia, New Zealand, maybe Ireland's a little bit different. I don't know how many people they have as far as an immigrant population there. So we're used to different accents, different way of saying things or whatever. And the most important thing is that you are heard and understood clearly. And
Mhm.
so if somebody, and you'll see this a lot on television, like we'll see people, what some YouTubers would constantly like look at and say, oh, this is some horrible mistake. Average person doesn't even care. Whereas I do think, and I'd like to know why, and I try to ask my students from Russia, is there is this perfectionist type of attitude that seems that they need to know the language to some extreme level, and Americans don't even know, right? So this is the problem. Yeah, so we do have this internalized that if somebody, and Noam Chomsky talked about this, the linguist,
Mhm.
he basically says a native speaker is somebody who can recognize a mistake, but might not necessarily know why that's a mistake, but they can recognize it. And so I think when it comes to making mistakes in real life here, that no one's going to do it
Mhm.
as long as you're understood, whether you forget an article or to be, or maybe you use the wrong choice of words or whatever. If you're at a B1 level and you're able to be understood, that's going to be fine. No one's going to really correct you. But I do feel that a lot of my students from Russia kind of want to be so perfect sometimes that it actually backfires quite a bit. So yeah.
Y- Yeah, I get that a lot. Some C1 student comes to me and asks to improve his grammar or something. And I look at him and just, there is nothing to improve there. Where,
Right.
where is he
Right.
going? Like, what does he
Right.
want? And
Right.
I just recommend them. Find a native speaker. It will be your top, like, big boss, this or
Mhm.
something. But they just searching for this, and we were recently chatting, and we mentioned the sky and the skies, and I
Mhm.
googled the difference. So the skies is a particular location, some
Mhm.
district. So, and these differences, when we go deep into the language, like sometimes even the native speaker doesn't know why we use this guy or this guys, and like where is the difference or something. Yeah.
Right. So they'll know that they need to say it, but they don't
Mm-hmm.
know why they're saying it that way. And
Mm-hmm.
that's what the most important thing is. So for example, you could so for example, and I'm trying to think of some recent example I
Mm-hmm.
had in a lesson that there was something that you could okay, on the weekend. Okay, so by the way, if anyone's wondering, at the weekend is British English, on the weekend is American English. We never say at the weekend. So we can say on the weekend, I like to go to the park. But then we can
Mm-hmm.
also say on the weekends, I like to go to the park. They're both exactly the same thing. But a lot of students, and this is particularly, again, with my Russian students, they want to know why one is plural and one isn't. And I'm like, don't worry about it. It is. Now, the technical reason is that if we say the weekends, we're looking at them as individual weekends, whereas we talk about on the weekend, it's just this concept of weekend. And
Mm-hmm.
it's at that point where it doesn't matter because what you're saying is essentially the same. So a lot of students will delve into this idea of why is this plural and this one's singular or whatever. And it's like, stop worrying about it. You'll
Yeah,
be
but
wasting too much time focusing on this and not moving forward. Right.
exactly. And then they create some branch on the forum, and yeah. So, well,
Mhm.
um, I mean, it feels like our conversation flows, but then we completely switch to another topic. But well, in my book, Making English Clear, it's just I translated it into English. I
Mhm.
give some tips on how to learn English without overwhelming yourself.
Mhm.
May you please comment a few of these tips?
Mhm.
So, the first one, using did instead of an irregular verb. When you say, I did eat instead of I ate, or I did buy instead of I bought. What are your thoughts on that?
Um, so there's a few things. People will do the same thing with will.
Mm-hmm.
So to talk about the future, they'll always say, I will use the base verb and then so on. Now, there's a debate as to whether we have a future tense in English or not. I say that we don't have a future tense, that it is basically a tense that is the present tense that we modify to indicate the future. The context
Mm-hmm.
determines it. So if you say, for example, I work tomorrow, that's technically a present simple sentence, but by adding tomorrow, you're adding the context that this action or this fact, in this case, because we're talking about present simple tense,
Mm-hmm.
that this fact happens tomorrow. So the time changes based on context, and the reason why is that there is, when we think of first, second, or third form, we're conjugating words, right? So
Mm-hmm.
like you just mentioned, irregular verbs and regular verbs, we conjugate verbs, but there is no conjugation for a fourth form or a future form. Hence the reason why I say we don't have it. But back to your question, what did I think if you're A2,
Mm-hmm.
this will help you get by.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Um, Now a lot of students will just keep it in present simple tense. They'll just say,
Oh,
I
yeah.
ate yesterday. Right. We
Yes.
usually right. So a lot of when it comes to I did, we usually use that if we are answering a question with did, did you eat yesterday?
I
Yes,
did.
I did
Mm-hmm.
eat. Or we could say, yes, I ate. Now, on the other hand, is we usually use did or do or does or whatever when we want to emphasize something that maybe the other person doesn't believe. So, for example, I could say, did you do your homework yesterday?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And you could say, yes, I did do my
Mhm.
homework because that's a did. Then if I say, are you sure? You can say, yes, I did do it. Now, in this situation, we emphasize the word did or do or does. So
Mhm.
if you say, I did go to the store, I did finish my homework, I did talk to him, you're trying to convince somebody who doesn't know. Are you sure you talked to him yesterday? Yes, I did talk to him yesterday. And you have to
Mhm.
have that emphasis there.
Yeah.
But you could do this. But I think what's more important is I guess it depends on whether being in the right tense is important because like I said, a lot of people just keep it in present simple, and a lot of students that I have who do the conversation, they just keep stuff in present simple form.
Yeah, true.
Mhm,
And when these learners, and usually not quite young, like they're in their 30s or 40s, and they
mhm,
tell me, I need to speak English, but I don't want to learn irregular verbs. I just want to order coffee abroad somewhere. And I
mhm.
say, okay, I have a tip for you. Like, you may use did, you will be understood, it will be correct, but of course, native speakers don't do this because they know irregular verbs.
Right.
So, yeah. Hmm.
Well, in that situation too, I mean, if they just want to do that, the problem is they'll learn a lot of phrases and get a phrase book. Problem is, you don't know what the answer will be. So if I
Yeah.
go up to
Yeah.
somebody in France and I'd say, "Je voudrais un café, s'il vous plaît," and then they just start saying something to me in French that I don't know. I mean, chances are I will know it, but like somebody else might not know. But they just memorize the phrase "Je voudrais something," right?
Mhm.
Um, if then you get an answer, you're not prepared for that answer because you've just learned how to ask for a coffee or something else, right?
Yeah,
So yeah.
exactly. Well, and uh, the second thing, so I found a few researchers, yeah,
Mhm.
where the linguists found more like the most commonly used tenses,
Mhm.
simple group and present continuous and present perfect, like it's five, um,
Mhm.
and I try to concentrate on them while teaching a student, and sometimes it's just enough, this minimum where they can go and survive in
Mhm.
any American speaking land.
Right. Right.
So, what are your thoughts on this?
And we can even break that down more. I mean, technically, about 75% of them will be present simple, past simple, present continuous.
Mhm.
Okay. And this is one of what I would say is one of the biggest mistakes that Russian speakers make is they try to force perfect tense. Now, the worst thing that ever happened in the English language or when
Mhm.
creating what we did, see, the English language isn't created, it's discovered, and then we name things based on the observations that we see. So, like the concept of a modal verb. A modal verb wasn't defined as such academically until like 1932. So the idea of a modal verb is less than 100 years old as far as being academically identified. Now, a lot of my students will always use perfect tense when they should be using present simple. And I even asked one student one time, I go, why do you keep putting it in present perfect tense? And she goes, I don't want to sound stupid. I want to sound more advanced. They think that the word present simple means easy, but it doesn't. That's just the name. You could call it present John. Okay. It doesn't matter. You could call it anything you want, but they think because they see the word simple, then it means it's the easy way to say something. No, that is going to be the absolute most used um, tense in the English language. So, but in English, a lot of people or Russian speakers overuse perfect tense, present perfect tense, and there is a difference between British English and American English on this, I'll admit, and a pretty big difference. But
Mhm.
there's a difference nonetheless. So it all depends on your style and yeah, most of the tenses are going to be present simple, past simple, present continuous. And we usually use present continuous to talk about the future as well.
Right. So this is exactly what I wanted to tell everyone. And now, when they hear it from you, from a native speaker, from an English teacher, not just
Right.
a man from the street. I mean,
Right.
I forgot to mention that Dave is a blogger, and I firstly discovered his channel on YouTube, and then Dave commented one of my videos, and we now here. So I invited
Right.
Dave for this interview. Oh, well, so talking about tenses, I get it a lot from Russian students that they are afraid to sound stupid because they use this simple group. And also they always try to switch to past perfect, which is actually almost on daily basis. We don't need it. I mean,
So past perfect is the least used tense by far in English language. Yeah. Like less than 1%.
Right. Yeah, but they analyzed 100,000 words or verbs. I don't remember exactly, but the reason there was 1 or 2 cases of past perfect there. So just
Right.
um,
Yeah.
so we can just highlight that using simple group doesn't make you stupid, doesn't make you an idiot or anything. Yep.
Well, the biggest problem is that people will use it in or perfect tense incorrectly. So, for example, somebody might say, "I have gone to the store this morning." Okay, that is correct, grammatically incorrect. I went to the store this morning. Now, in American English, we usually use perfect tense for something that is true and can change, something that is still true now. Want to indicate some amount of time between something in the past to now. We have been on this call for 27 minutes, right? So we can use perfect tense there. What we rarely do in American English is use it for past actions that are completed. So, and I always do this. So I have my tea here. If I drink my tea, I could say I just drank my tea. Now, if you're trying to indicate something happened recently, it doesn't have to do with the tense. You use the word just. Okay, I just drank my tea. Okay,
Yeah.
so that means that it was very recently. It's not the tense that does that, but the tense, if we're using it for a past situation, it means it has some impact on the present. And usually that impact is that the person doesn't know. So if you ever watch news in the United States, you'll hear the news reporter say, there has been a shooting in New York today or something like that, because it's America. There's shootings all the time here. Anyway, so you'll hear there has been a shooting. So the idea there is that the person watching the news, because it's information gathering, doesn't know that. Now, you could perfectly say there was a shooting in New York today. So I always recommend to my students that if the action is completed and finished and you can't change it, you need a time machine to go change it, just keep it in past tense. Okay? And that is the way to look at it. Just keep it in past tense. Don't worry about perfect tense. Okay? Don't be like, don't say like I have finished my homework. You could just say I finished my homework. Or I just finished my homework. So, and yeah, so a lot of Russian students particularly will force the perfect tense into a sentence. And I always say use it as a last resort.
It's crazy, but kids study present perfect in schools. And sometimes I say, guys, you don't even have this life experience to use this tense, because like for 10 years already, you were not on this planet
Right.
10 years ago.
Well,
Yeah.
I always say to my students, and now one thing I do want to make clear. So there is a difference between American and British English with past perfect, present perfect. However, when it comes to present perfect continuous, in past perfect continuous, the rules are the same. So there isn't a difference between American English and British English on that one. So it is particularly the simple forms of the perfect tenses. That being said, yeah, I mean, that's the problem is, and I even tell my my students, a lot of my Russian students, that I mostly reteach them because they had been taught wrong in the past. So I use past perfect there. And the reason why is I'm saying up till some certain point in time in the past, they had been taught wrong, but now at this new point, you're seeing a change that you will now be taught, correctly. So there are times, so like there, and I could just say you were taught incorrectly in the past, but by putting it in a perfect tense, you're indicating that there is some change. Now, if I just said you were taught incorrectly in the past, it doesn't indicate that there is some sort of change in direction in that learning for them. But by putting it in past perfect tense, we have now added that extra bit of understanding, which then makes the listener know, we're going in a different direction. So yeah, there's so much when it comes to the tenses in English.
And the problem is in our books and our student books, actually, they limit students. And I can say this, I hate books which were written in Russia. Maybe a few of them are good. I have never seen them in my life.
Right.
But, the thing is that they limit a student, for instance, and I want to talk with you about the future tense more, that I work tomorrow would be considered wrong in Russia because it will only mean that you are 100% certain, but it would it would be better if you use it with some certain time, like my train leaves at 7, and that's it.
Right.
So how certain should you be in your action to use present tense with tomorrow?
Well, and with will, we can also use will to emphasize something, like with do. Like if somebody says, who can do this tomorrow? You can go, I will do it tomorrow. Or you could say, are you going to finish your homework? You say, yes, I will finish my homework. It means that you haven't completed it yet. Now, I did finish my homework. When we use that previous example, it's a past situation. It's done. It's completed. I will finish my homework. It creates certainty. So we can use will to emphasize like we use do for the future, which would be a different situation. As far as the tomorrow question, I mean, it depends. Okay. So let's say work. Let's just say work. So you can say, I work tomorrow. I am working tomorrow. Now, this is something interesting. So why would you use I work tomorrow instead of I am working tomorrow? You want to think of continuous form as focusing on an action that has a start and an eventual finish, one action, whereas I work tomorrow is just a fact. Okay, so if I say I am working tomorrow, that means that I am going to go to the office 9 a.m. or whatever, going to finish at 5 p.m. or whatever, and that's one action with a beginning and an end. I work tomorrow is just focusing on the fact that you will be doing engaging in some sort of employment work. Okay. Now I'm going to work tomorrow just indicates that it is part of your schedule. Now, I will work tomorrow, we probably would never say. Okay, so this is where a lot of Russian students might say, oh yeah, I will work tomorrow. Right? And in this context, we probably would never say will in that situation. We can use will maybe more with to be. Okay, if we're using an adjective, like I will be happy if you do that tomorrow. Right? But you can't say going to. I'm going to be happy if you do that tomorrow. But going to means more certainty. But I will be happy. We can use that there. It's a slippery slope as far as like how you can do that. But we don't use it. We don't use will most of the time. But the problem is a lot of Russian students will use it all the time.
So yeah, will is overused by Russian speakers. So if you're certain, or maybe if I'm not certain, so let's say I watch a movie tomorrow, But if I'm not certain, may I still say
See,
it?
now this is where using other verbs and
Mhm,
using modal verbs is going to be
mhm,
important. I might
mhm.
watch a movie tomorrow,
All right.
right? I think I'm going to watch a movie tomorrow. I
Mhm,
think I might watch a movie tomorrow. And this is one thing that is always forgotten about. So remember, if we say I might watch a movie tomorrow, tomorrow creates that future context, right?
mhm, mhm.
But if you want to say you're not certain that you're going to do that, by the way, might, may, and can need to be used more by students. A lot of them don't use it as much. But in this case, I might watch, present simple, a
Mhm.
movie, your object, tomorrow. So we put the context in there. So it's not necessarily will. In this case, using might to indicate it, creating uncertainty is the
Mhm.
best way to say that sentence.
Right. So I guess students should highlight this moment, and it's very good to know. And also, Russian student books link some words to some tenses, and like for example, the word just belongs to perfect group, and I say no. Just is not a slave of any perfect group. It's just a
Right.
word.
Right. I
Um,
mean, we can say I am just finishing my homework right now. I just finished my homework. Now we're looking at it in a past simple. And that's another thing. It's like there are and I don't know where they come from. Like
I know.
there was this one rule that it's like you only use past simple when you're talking about some time in the I don't remember what it was,
Mhm.
but I was like just like uh or no, you I even forgot what the rule was that it was so ridiculous. Um and and no, that's not the case. And see, that's the problem, I think. A lot of people focus so much on the rule, they don't kind of focus on just how it's being used.
So,
Okay.
what is the problem here? I guess that today is uh, is taken as a present tense, and I
Mhm.
say that no, today has this morning, which is the past, and
Right.
this evening, which is the future. So,
Right.
but people think that if something happened today,
Right.
you should attach it to present perfect because it's today, it's still present. So people really
Oh,
lose the sense of time, actually.
right. If I say I worked today,
Yep,
okay, it
yep.
means I'm already finished. We're still in today, but the action is, already completed. You could also say I was working today. Again, focusing on the action that at some point I went to work and at some point I finished work, right? So for example, like today is a calendar day. So if you just like if you went to the store, you can't say I am going to the store. You can't use it in present simple. Now, a lot of people say I have gone to the store. Now,
Mm.
this is where it depends on the situation. Okay, if somebody comes up to me and says, "Oh, I have gone to the store," it's just like, okay,
Mhm,
right? We usually would just say, "I went to the store." The action is completed because
mhm,
when somebody says, "I have gone to the store," even though it's today and it's
mhm.
connected to today, there's a difference between today and now. The fact that somebody went to the store has no impact on whatever it is regarding the situation you're talking about now. And
Yeah.
that's what's important for people to understand is if you're going to use or present perfect for something that is completed, you need to have it that it is strongly connected to now. And I don't and
Mhm,
again, yes, today is now, but now is now. Now right now where I live is 11:13 a.m. Okay? That
mhm,
is now. All right. Yeah.
mhm. Like, who eats all my candy bars? I have gone to the store twice.
Mhm.
And I'm not sure. Can we connect present perfect and the past? Like I have gone twice and bought.
Now, in this situation, we can say who has eaten all of my candy bars
Yeah.
because it is an unknown. It is a
Mhm.
situation that can change. If you say who has eaten all my candy bar, now you could say who ate all my candy bars. You could say that, but who has eaten all my candy bars indicates that is a connection to now, because you're asking about a situation that is like right now you're trying to figure out who did
Yeah.
this. Right. So
Exactly.
therefore it's connected to now. Now, if we say who ate my candy bars, that's connected to the fact that the candy bars were eaten, passive voice, were eaten by somebody else, and that the action of those being eaten is now completed.
Mhm.
So in this situation, you can use both. You could say, now that's a good one. You say, I have already been to the store twice. Okay.
Mhm.
When you say, I have already been to the store twice, you can also say, I was already at the store twice, for example. So why would
Mhm.
you use one or the other? Present perfect tense would indicate that you're not finished going to the store. You have gone twice. You might go a third time, a fourth time, so on. It's like saying, I have visited France 3 times.
Mhm.
Okay. It doesn't indicate that I'm going to stop. Now, I always tell students this, if we use the Soviet Union, and I could say, how many times did you visit the Soviet Union? I visited the Soviet Union 3 times, let's say, because it no
All right.
longer exists as a country. So your chance to visit it is now over, but France is still there. So you still have that number. So in that situation, that's really important as well.
Mhm. Right. Well, it's a good one because many students don't even know how to ask this question. So when teachers talk about this, okay, teachers talk, and it's maybe we know what bothers them. We're trying to solve this problem for them. Well, wow, that was a good one. Now we can switch to some other topics
Mhm.
besides grammar, or maybe you have something to add about grammar. If
The only
Mhm.
thing I want to add is stop using perfect tense as much if you're a Russian speaker. Okay, please, God. So when I'm sitting there begging people not to do it anymore, that shows how much it is wrong, right? So please stop using that. Don't be afraid of using modal verbs. Okay, and when speaking about the future, don't always use will. Those are the 3. I mean, yes, you have the issues with articles and other things, right? Another thing I would recommend, and this is again for Russian speakers, try not to start a sentence with probably or maybe. Probably I will go to the store. Say, I
Mhm.
will probably go to the store.
Mhm.
Okay. Now, maybe I will go to the store is different than I may be going to the store. Now, maybe is an adverb. I may be going is using may with then present continuous.
Mhm.
Okay. So there is an actual different structure, but a lot of times people will put probably, maybe, or something like that at the beginning of the sentence and then say the rest. Try to get out of that habit. Try to understand if it's a modal verb and or to put that in the middle of the sentence. I will probably go to the store later today.
Yeah.
And in that case, we'll use will because we're saying probably. We use will when we're uncertain about things. It's not scheduled. It's not planned. I will probably go to the store. So
Mhm.
we would use will there.
Right. Awesome. I guess I should write it down and post an article with adding you as an author of these words for
Right.
Russian speakers. And so, uh, how does a teacher find students?
That's a good situation. Instead of getting into the geopolitical situation that has happened, most of my students were and still are from Russia. So a lot of my students lived in Russia, and now a lot of them are now outside of Russia. But I do have students from other places. Now, for me, and see, this is, I think, a misconception. So I have a YouTube channel, and I've been able to build that a little bit. I don't use YouTube to try to be a YouTuber. I only use it to try to find students. That's it. So when people say, "Oh, you're jealous of somebody because they have a big," I don't care. Like, I really don't care. If I had 100 subscribers, but
Mhm.
40 of those subscribers were regular students, that's all I care about. Like, I don't care about, I actually don't like making videos, to tell you the truth. I would rather sit here on my web camera, have a student, go through a lesson every hour. That is what I like to do. Making the videos and editing them and all that, I don't really like to do. So YouTube is one. If and again, it depends on where the student. Unfortunately, now it depends on where the student is, whether they, because of Swift and all that, whether they have the means to pay for a lesson or not. There are others like italki, Verbling, Preply, which honestly, if anyone's going to look for an English teacher from those, use Verbling. italki has very poor quality teachers, and Verbling kind of, or excuse me, Preply kind of the same, but they treat their teachers horribly. Okay,
Mhm.
so
Mhm.
I would recommend Verbling. It's definitely the best. But do your own research. See if you can find people who do one-on-one lessons if you're doing that. But it's all um, just like experimenting with marketing. What works, what doesn't work,
You have a website, Just Say It
Mhm.
English, right?
right?
So,
Yeah.
is it connected to your YouTube channel, or does it help you? Uh,
Mhm. Well, I mean, the website was around way longer than
mhm,
than the YouTube channel has been around, and the YouTube channel has really blown up in less than a year. So
mhm,
prior to last June, I didn't really have anything.
mhm,
But yeah, so basically up till very recently, I had enough students that could pay for lessons, take lessons because they had the ability to pay for lessons. Um,
technically, yeah. Mhm,
right, and that unfortunately
mhm,
is a huge problem, and it is unfortunate because there are, regardless of where you are on whatever, students
mhm,
want to learn English. Okay, and in this situation, the website was always up. So I created the website. I just learned how to do a website. So I didn't have a web designer or anything. It was just like, okay, how do I make this thing? How do I make it so students can pay and whatnot? The website itself doesn't really bring in anyone. It was just more that it was my current students that I had, that it was a way for them to pay. And mostly because I was kicked off of italki. And I think the reason why I was kicked off of italki is then if you look on, if you Google search, at least here in the United States, about leaving italki, the first article that you will get on Google is my article about why I'm leaving italki. So
Oh,
right, and the reason why is they've created a race to the bottom. And what's really happening, and if there's any student out there thinking about getting an English teacher, the
mhm,
market for English teachers has been flooded with bad teachers, okay, that cannot explain anything, that don't know anything. And you have to differentiate yourself from others. So I have heard a lot of horror stories from my students who originally were at italki. They'll have a
mhm,
teacher that they pay a lot of money for, and they'll like I have one student, Russian speaking student, who took a class with a teacher that she paid $50 for, and she asked to explain perfect tense, and he couldn't. Okay, and it's like, well, and that's the big problem with teaching English, is a lot of native English speakers are just like, I can speak English, so I can teach English. And no, that's not the same. I mean, if you're going to pay for someone to just talk to you, then I mean, you can find tons of forums for free. Ton. If they're
mhm,
not going to correct you, if they can't explain what the problem is, you can find them for free. And what's happened is the quality of teaching has gone down significantly. Hopefully that changes, but that's why I recommend always doing research for like if you're going to buy a product from somebody who's online, who is a YouTuber that says that their product's going to help you. Like
Yeah,
something you know.
exactly.
All
You're
right.
proving your expertise with that. And this is exactly the same thing what I'm doing right now with you.
Mhm.
And also, I recorded several videos, but I was popular on TikTok. I had 135,000, even more followers and millions of views. But if you ask me how many students did it bring,
Yeah.
I just guess 2.
Yeah, you were telling me like 2, right? Yeah.
Because, the thing is, people are not on TikTok for searching a teacher.
Right.
They just want to relax, have fun, comment,
Right.
like, that's it.
And same thing with YouTube, and the same thing with any social media. And that is the big challenge. And I'm going to be I have not made a video in like nearly 2 months. And the reason why is I was not feeling well. And now I'm going to come back and make it. And, I'm going to mention in that video that first and foremost, my first, second, and third priority are my current students. It's not YouTube. It's those students who are paying for a lesson and relying on me to provide them with what is needed. That is my only priority. YouTube is just marketing. That's all it is. And a lot of people just want to get free advice, and YouTube does that. But honestly, again, it goes back to what we mentioned earlier about self-correcting yourself. Okay, you can watch all the YouTube videos you want, but even those people like Steve Kaufman, the polyglot, will get a lot of input, but then eventually will go to a native speaker for them to correct the mistakes that they have made during a lesson or something like that. So that is important. It's still important. And so I do think that learning a language can help you maybe with input, getting more words or whatnot. But it's all, you got to speak. You at some point have to speak, and you need to be corrected. As we talked about earlier, a lot of people don't correct here in the United States just because we're used to broken English, as we call it, right? It's just a normal way of life. And people, and I even have this on my YouTube channel. I have native English speakers that nobody can understand, right? But they're a native English speaker, and they wouldn't be considered not so, right? And like there's this one guy that I have who speaks English horribly. It's all wrong. Like he uses the wrong tenses, uses the wrong, like he's bad, but he only knows English. So, he's a native English speaker. He's not like, you can't say, oh, well, he speaks French too, right? I mean, he's a native English speaker. And I think there is an article that I have that I'm going to mention in one of my videos of this one. He's passed on now, but a linguist that says there is the English speaker, and then there's the ideal English speaker. And that ideal English speaker does not exist. And a lot of people try to go to that ideal level. Nobody hears at that level. Okay, even Neil deGrasse Tyson and other people who are like extremely intellectual, they make mistakes as well. Everyone makes mistakes. And I think for Russian speakers particularly, if they realize that everyone makes mistakes, it's going to make their learning a lot easier. Trust me. And another thing, like with Russian speakers, I always ask them, what do they think is like the worst part? I always say my accent, or my pronunciation. First of all, I mean, I hate to tell people this. In the United States, no one cares about your accent. Like really, no one cares. Okay. And someone might say, well, I'm an American. Trust, like here's my passport. No one cares. Okay. So yeah.
Hear
so no
him out, people, please.
Right. Nobody cares about that. However, a lot of people they always say, oh, it's my pronunciation and my accent. I usually say, chances are it's not. Chances are the best thing is your pronunciation. And I find Russian speakers to have really good pronunciation. Now, one thing in English is a lot of Russian speakers will say, where's the stress here? Where's that? That's not a huge thing in English. Okay. We have stresses at different points. Now, there are times where it's important, like for the difference between record and record, for example. One's a noun, one's a verb. But for the most part, with the exception of cases like that, stress doesn't matter. But it's like everyone's focused, if they're from a Slavic language, because I'm learning Slovak myself, is that they're all focused on where's the stress. It's just not here. It's not a big thing here. So I think a lot of that is, honestly, I think the biggest obstacle to many Russian learners learning English are themselves. That they think they're not doing as well as they think they are, and they're actually doing a lot better than they think they are.
In search for stress and perfection. Russian speakers.
Right. So I could say, for example, like, I want to go to the store next week. Where was the stress in that sentence? Right. I want to go to the store. No one would say, oh, where was your stress? Right. No one cares. Yeah. So.
Well, so coming back to finding students, we have search engines which, I don't know, analyze the internet and find for you these requests. When someone is writing on Facebook or VK, which is popular in Russia, or Telegram now, I need a student, please somebody, a teacher, please somebody recommend them to me. And I see this request, and another problem is not only it's not only me. There are 50 other teachers who also scroll in these websites, and this person gets 50 offers.
Right.
And the student usually goes with the cheapest one.
Right. Which is two things. The cheapest might not necessarily be the worst, and the most expensive might not necessarily be the best. And people need to keep that in mind. Okay. Like there's somebody, I don't know if you've ever watched his channel. In English, his name is The Bearded Linguist. His name's Kieran.
Yep. I watched.
Right. So like he and I have talked a little bit, and I'm thinking about maybe doing something with him in the future. Really nice guy, really awesome guy. Anyway, and he might be someone you want to talk to. Excellent guy. Anyway, he paid like $70 for a lesson. I don't know if you saw that video, and it was just like horrible. Right. And he's just like, why? And then I think they did like 55 minutes, and he's like, he only did 55 minutes. I paid for an hour. I want the refund for my 5 minutes back because I paid $70. That can be like, $10, right? Or something like that. So just because now what I usually find is that if somebody does have the cheapest price, they usually have that for a reason. However, if somebody has a more expensive price, it might not indicate that they are good or bad. So at the cheaper level, I usually do find that type of teaching is really crap. Whereas I find when you get to the more expensive, you have a wide variation of who is and isn't great. And I think that's all languages, because I've noticed that with my French learning as well, which is the reason why I have stuck with my same French teacher for the last 6 years. I'm good. She's perfect. I don't need any more.
Yeah, right. So when I was 16 years old, I was a high school student, and one grandmother came and asked for a student to help her grandkid. And my lesson cost $1.
Right.
And, and now it has been how many years since
I don't know. You got to tell me. Right.
Yeah, I need to calculate. I mean, it's not easy.
Right.
I'm not a math teacher. Okay, anyway, 4
double
plus
your time
10,
almost, right?
Like far more than 10 years of teaching,
Right.
and then at this point when you wrote a book, when I got so many insights that I had something to say, something to add,
Mhm.
and at this point I'm like, well, maybe it's time to increase from
Right.
yeah. So what about you? Was it the time when you were taking less and then you decided you have to take more for a lesson?
Um, so when I started off, and I started off when I was in Russia, my last few months living in Murmansk. I started at $19 an hour. Okay. My biggest problem was more about the schedule because I was teaching. So I really couldn't go full time. As soon as I came back here full time, I did $19 an hour and I did the whole digital nomad thing and went around and went to places. Now I'm pretty much here, though I'm maybe thinking about relocating to Slovakia. And if people wonder why I'm mentioning Slovakia, my family is originally from there. So that's the reason why I mention Slovakia a lot. So you have to transition. And if this is for teachers, you have to transition from being a teacher to being a business person.
Mhm.
And you have to make your determination on what you're going to do based on being a business. And I find that a lot of teachers can't make that transition. They love teaching English, they do the stuff, they never increase their prices. As a matter of fact, with both my Slovak and French teacher, I tell them both, I go, you need to charge more. like I always tell them that. Now my French teacher's like, no, I do this as a side thing. I don't mind. I'm like, yeah, seriously, you need to charge more. But I think what it is you need to think of it as a business. And yes, you are a teacher, but at the same time, if this is your sole source of income, which now it is for me, I used to work in politics for 28 years and did quite well. This is my sole source of income. You have to think of it like a business. If you are constantly only thinking like a teacher, then you're never going to be able to move up, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. And it's when a student can get a good teacher for a cheap price, because teachers usually are humble and they are quiet and
Right.
uh, but yeah. So I don't know how did this question appear here.
Mhm.
Homeless people in LA, I just have
I don't know.
written down.
I think we were just talking about that and somehow that got like pinned somehow
Yeah.
by accident. Yeah. So
Uh, so yeah, we have this a lot in the videos about LA, and this is the reason why I am personally afraid to go there, because I saw these homeless people everywhere.
right.
So, what is it like in real life?
Some places are bad, admittedly. I was in Seattle a few weeks ago and it was not the greatest, I will admit. But I think that the thing is we, for better or for worse, we don't really think about it. And I say for better or for worse because we're not doing anything to help those people, right? Which I think is a whole different issue with policy altogether. But um, the things that I hear on television are not as bad as people say. If that were the case, I'm from Chicago. I should be dead by now because I should have already been shot by the time I was 2 years old. Okay, it's like you hear all these misconceptions about things, and I had thought about, and I'm still thinking maybe about doing a video going through a park in Chicago and showing
Mhm,
people, because it was a historical park and all that. And in this park, 11 people were murdered. Right.
mhm.
And it's just like I want to go through it and say, hey, listen, we just did, went through a park with a camera during the day. It's fine. And 11 people were killed here. Now, there there are issues with gun violence. Um, there are issues with homelessness. There are issues with income inequality. There are issues. as there are issues everywhere.
Mhm.
But one of the things I find with a lot of students coming from other countries is like so some media outside the United States paint the United States a lot worse than it is. It's like, oh my God, a homeless person. And an American's like, okay, yeah, so right. So and I think
Mhm.
that is the difference. But a lot of people also come here and think, oh, I'm coming to the United States. I'm going to make a lot more money. So there
Mhm.
I'm going to live in Beverly Hills or something. It's like, you know how much Beverly Hills costs to live in? Yes, you might be a back end engineer, but that's not going to pay for a house in Beverly Hills. That's going to pay for an apartment
Mhm.
in LA somewhere. Okay. And I think there's a misconception as to expectations in all. So they
Mhm.
think so a lot of things that people seem to think that are dangerous and bad are not as bad as they think. And the
Mhm.
good things they always hear are not as good as they think. And honestly, I'll say this is one of the reasons why I actually did like living in Russia is because every I guess like everything was kind of even to me.
Mhm.
Right. And I didn't have a huge amount of expectations, but which is good, I guess. Because when you don't have a huge amount of expectations, then you don't have to worry about some expectation being broken. Like you sit and say, "Oh, that's not as good as I thought it was. That's not as
Mhm.
good, or that's better than I thought it was." Except for the restaurants. I love restaurants in Russia. I miss them so. I miss them a lot. I was not expecting that, but yeah, I think there are a lot of misconceptions that like I think the homeless thing is more of a is more of a policy issue. But if you pass by a homeless person on the street, it's not like they're going to grab you, start beating you up, and take your money. Okay, whoever says that's an idiot. That
Mhm.
doesn't happen. And again, we have more than enough in my hometown of Chicago. I've seen them more than enough times. It's not dangerous. It's more
Mhm.
annoying that somebody asks you for money than it is like they're gonna do something. They're not gonna do anything. And then there'll be like one case that someone will find on the news saying, see what happened. It's like that's one case out of how many thousands of people, right? Or even
Mhm.
millions, unfortunately.
Yeah, this is consequences of having a television. Because I miss the old days when my dream to get to the United States of America, I saw the United States as a diamond,
Right.
and and when I came, actually, everyone was friendly. Streets
Mhm.
were clean, food was super sweet,
Mhm.
and um, I say sweet, not tasty. I'm sorry
Right.
for a
No, no,
reason.
no, 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 no. Okay, that's another word that Russian
I,
people
I
use
mean,
too much is tasty.
but this is exactly like what I say. I'm using sweet for a reason because
Right.
I
Mhm.
saw 5 rows of Snickers and
Right.
ice
Though, by
cream.
the way, Snickers bars, I think in Russia are better than in the United States.
Yes, exactly the same, but you have more flavors. This is
Well, not with the Snickers because we don't have the hazelnut ones here. But you have the
oh,
hazelnut. All we
we
have,
do.
but okay. So yeah, we do have more because we do have like the almond ones and other ones, but we don't have the hazelnut ones. And like when I lived in Murmansk,
Mhm.
um, before my lesson, I would go down to Dixie. I would buy a hazelnut Snickers and a big thing of water. And that's another thing. I think eating healthier because I gained a lot of weight. I lost 25 kilos in 5 months when I lived in Russia. Came back, gained it all back. And I was going to McDonald's. I was eating Snickers bars. It's just I think the quality of food was much, much better there. So see, you know,
Yeah,
yeah.
I gained weight in the United States, and I was
Right.
a small girl, and I came back, and everyone was laughing at me, like, "Look at her." And I was,
And you were in Wisconsin, so it's going to be cheese and
yeah.
hamburgers. And I don't know if they had my favorite fast food restaurant is from Wisconsin called Culver's.
Oh,
And I don't know if you might have seen one where you were, but oh, it's so good. But anyway, yeah. But I think like when you talk about meeting people and all that, or talk about
mhm,
the people, it really does matter by region. Right now, I am. I'm not from the state of Wisconsin, but Illinois and Wisconsin are kind of like the same,
Yeah, you're
right?
close.
Yeah,
Mhm.
and it's like and I'm from, like, literally, my grandfather lived a third of a mile from the Wisconsin border. So when we'd go visit my grandfather, we'd just walk and say, "Hey, we're in Wisconsin," and then come back. So I mean, that shows how close it was. And I think that people in certain you want, if you ever come to the United States, you want to know the region first. So you know.
Mhm. Right. So this idea of the American dream, I actually could have stayed there, but I didn't. It's a long story, but anyway, I wish to come back one day to the United
Mhm.
States. Like to come back, it's not like just to come for the first time
Right.
to visit for the first. It's something when you get reunited with this
Right.
air, this people, and I wish that one day it will be extremely easy for everyone to get to from country to country, and this day
Mhm.
will come. Nothing like there are good days, bad years, good years, but still,
Right.
you and I here together, which is important. We represent our countries, and this
Mhm.
is another reason why I wanted to record this video, to show Russian people and American people that we are just human beings who want to
Right.
learn, want to explore the earth, not just these
Right.
countries and borders and visas. And we are interested in cultures, and so I mean, yeah, I guess this is
Right.
important.
Well,
So.
yeah, and no, and you're right. And I mean, and there are issues
Mhm.
everywhere, obviously. And I mean, I think, like, people want to travel, and then also people want to settle certain places. And
Yeah.
it might be because they just want to, have the digital nomad lifestyle or something like
Mhm.
that. It could be that they want to leave where they're from. I mean, like, personally, me, I want to move to Europe. Or now, I did my master's degree in Canada. So I did my master's degree in Montreal, and Montreal is my favorite city in the world, really. And I just miss it and I love it. But, you know, there are other external factors sometimes that matter, but it's not the factors that people think. So, like, like, for example, again,
Mhm.
homelessness and crime and all that, I never think about. It's
Mhm.
one of those things that they blow up on television so much, but the reality of it is, like, they say, "Oh, you need a gun." I've never owned a gun. I'm from Chicago, that has the highest gun violence on earth. I've never been in a situation where I have needed a gun. So it's like, it's totally blown out of proportion, but other things aren't. So, for example, healthcare cost, extremely high. Cost of education, extremely high. Cost for an apartment or a house or whatever, extremely high. And it is, I sit there and I look at myself, and I reflect and I say, I can either live in Orlando, Florida, which is, even though I'm originally from Chicago, I kind of consider Orlando my home, because I lived there for over 20 years. Uh, I look at Orlando and I say, I can either pay $1,700 for a one bedroom apartment with nothing in it, doesn't include
Mhm.
utilities or anything, or I could go to Paris and spend the same amount of money. I mean, I love Orlando, but, we're talking about Paris. And the
Yeah.
cost of
Uh-huh.
living here has just become, people are not necessarily, and the politics are bad here. They're just really, really bad here. And as somebody who worked in politics, that's the reason why I don't work in politics anymore. 28 years was enough. But yeah, it's come to the point that, even taking the political stuff out of it or whatever, it's just becoming really hard to afford to live in the United States. And that's what it is. It really, I mean, when I look at Bratislava and say, or Paris, and I'm
Mhm.
seeing apartments the same price as Salt Lake City,
Mhm.
something's not right here. So yeah, I mean, we have our issues, and a lot of people, a lot of Americans are leaving the United States now. Some of them are going to travel the world. Um, somebody like me, I just want to go and settle down somewhere because I've done enough travel. It's like, okay, I've seen a
Mhm,
lot of stuff. So
mhm.
I used to love getting on airplanes. Now I can't.
I
Yeah.
get it. I get it.
Yeah.
Some people who don't travel a lot, they are excited about this. And oh my God, we've traveled so much and I'm tired. I
Right.
want
Do
to
it.
sleep at a decent hour.
Right. Get
Yeah.
on a 15-hour flight going from Doha to Chicago, and you'll realize how not fun it is. And that's half of the reason
Mhm.
why, like, I don't go to Europe as much because it's like, oh, do I really want to take a flight to go over to Europe?